Hey guys, Mithun here. Thanks for joining me on this video. It's actually been a long time in the making. It's been weeks, if not months, since I decided to make this video. I took a couple of shots. It's been sitting on my PC for a few weeks now, and finally I'm getting around to editing and uploading this video. So today we'll be having a look at the Audi RS3, the 2018. Obviously not this particular car here. This is just a 1:43 scale model of the car, although it's in the exact same color. We'll be having a look at the real deal. That's actually right behind the door here. There you go. So yeah, over the next few minutes, I'll get you familiar with this car, take you around the ins and outs, go on a short drive, talk about what works, what doesn't work, and why I ended up buying this particular car. So yeah, see you in a bit. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, what we'll be looking at today is the 2018 Audi RS3, the sedan, or as they call it, the limousine in Germany or in German. So this particular car is about a little less than 2 months old at this point. It has about 500 odd miles, I think a little less than 500 miles on it. It's the Nardo grey color. That is something I really fell in love with the very first time I saw it online. I think on an RS7 if I'm not mistaken. It's a beautiful shade of grey. Depending on the lighting, whether there's sunlight or if it's darker, the shade changes drastically. It looks gorgeous, and also it kind of flies under the radar a little bit. I didn't want something that's super shouty, the Vegas yellow, something along those lines. But nevertheless, it's a gorgeous car. It's actually a very understated car. I know the tailpipes give it away, but then when you compare it to a lot of the competition these days, especially stuff that's coming out of Mercedes-Benz, for example, it's a lot less shouty. In fact, some might say it's actually a little too understated for what is supposed to be the fire-breathing version of Audi's A3 S3 platform. But I like it the way it looks. It really looks understated. It goes about doing its business without really shouting out too much. So with that, let's get a little detailed look on the exterior features of this car. So some of the things that actually, before I get started on that, just a little bit about myself. Um, I am not a full-time YouTuber, as you can see, or you will see with the quality of the production of these videos and the way I get about doing things. I am not a professional YouTuber. I actually have a full-time daytime job. I just love cars, and I'm, as people who know me would agree when I say I'm hugely opinionated. So I just felt that, and people come to me with a lot of questions regarding cars, what cars they should buy, stuff like that. And as I mentioned, I've been meaning to do this for a very, very long time. I've just, not gotten around to doing it until now, that is. So yeah, that's basically what you'll see. Again, you see a lot of new car reviews online. If that's what you're looking for, this is probably not the right place for it, because I obviously can't be reviewing new cars right when they come out all day, every day. What I feel you don't see a whole lot of these days actually is long-term reviews, right? Like, honest to goodness, people who've owned cars or who've had cars for a very long period of time, at least a couple of months, doing honest to goodness videos about what are the issues that they're facing with the car on a day-to-day basis, what they like about the car, what they don't like about the car. It's easy to do 0 to 60 numbers. It's very, very easy to just get a bunch of instrumental tests done, publish some of them on a YouTube video or a blog of some sort and call it a day. But very few people actually follow through on day-to-day upkeep and living with some of these cars, right? I actually have two other Audis, a 2012 Audi S4 and a 2017 Audi Allroad, the A4 wagon. I'll actually get to those at some point in the near future, hopefully, assuming this video doesn't bomb spectacularly. But let's get started with this guy. Alright, so onto the exterior. So what sets this car apart visually from on the front of it from the lesser siblings, the A3 and the S3? The most obvious, in fact, let me see if I can zoom in here. There you go. Would be the honeycomb grille structure that you see over here, which is very different from what you see on the A3 and the S3. In addition to that, I mean, apart from the obvious RS3 badging, you also see this very, very prominent Quattro badging, right? So now, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of this, frankly speaking, primarily because it just feels a little too shouty. But then the good thing about this though is the fact that this is not a sticker. This is actually embossed, and you can see the raised lettering all through the lower panel. It does look kind of cool. As I just mentioned, not my cup of tea in terms of just being a little too obvious, a little too shouty for me. What you'll also see here are actual function air vents. I don't know if you can actually see the intercooler inside. There you go. And functioning brake duct vents. So all of this is functional, which is again very different from what you'll see on the A3 and the S3. The same goes on this side also. You have full LED headlights. The interesting thing about actually a lot of the recent Audis is the fact that you will not see a fog light at the bottom. The reason being, what you see over here is what Audi refers to as the cornering lamp, which given its angle can actually act as a fog light. I'll show you that a little later. But it's a very clean setup, nothing too messy. American US cars don't get the functional headlight washers. Cost cutting, I guess. I don't know. You have the parking sensors. You have the so I actually went with the front plate delete, which is why you see these glossy little spots there where the bracket for the front plate would have been. I think it looks really, really bad, but hey, it is what it is. Now moving on to the wheels. The wheels again, these have been somewhat polarizing. I'm indifferent towards them. I'm not a huge fan of them, but then I know a lot of people online don't like the direction that Audi has taken recently with respect to their wheel designs. With these particular designs, I'm indifferent. They don't look great, but I don't think they look bad. But it is what it is, I guess. I also did not go with the black optics package. which is why you see this sort of two-tone gunmetal and silver finish over here. If you went for the black optics package, a lot of that stuff will actually be blacked out. So you do have that if you feel that that makes the wheels look a little better. I personally don't. I don't like the black optics package, at least not on Nardo Grey. But yeah, that's up to you. So yes, onto the wheels. So you can see this nice little detailing here, very reminiscent of Audi's attention to detail of Audi Sport, which by the way is what Quattro GmbH has now officially been rebranded as, Audi Sport GmbH. You see these huge 8-pot brake calipers. These are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, from the previous gen R8, and they work exceptionally well. Exceptionally well. These are not the optional carbon ceramics. You can get the RS3 with the optional carbon ceramics on the front only if you want to. I don't see a reason why you would want to, unless of course you're tracking. But yeah, I don't know. It works really well. You have huge cross-drilled rotors up front. I think they're 14 point something inch. I can add the specs in the end of the video a little later. Moving on to some of the other trims and pieces. So what you see here is the typical alu optic finish, the matte aluminum matte metal finish that Audi actually adds to a lot of their S and RS cars. This is actually a little different from what I've seen. Not just this, even the other chrome finish that you see is actually different from some of the S cars that I've seen in the past, including my own S4. This is really matte. It's flat, right? I'm not sure if it's coming through on the camera. This is flat. It almost feels like they've taken a chrome strip and put a flat matte paint on top of it. It's very different from the S cars, which have a slight bit more shine to them. I think it looks beautiful. It really does. And in fact, that's another reason why I decided not to go for the black optics package, because I feel like this matte aluminum finish is a unique signature of S and RS cars. It makes them very easily recognizable. You will also see, again, similar setup in the back with respect to the tires. Oh, I forgot to mention this. So this car actually has the Dynamic package, not the Dynamic Plus. The Dynamic Plus is the one that nets you the carbon ceramic brakes. I didn't go for that. But what the Dynamic package gets you is the staggered wheel setup along with the red brake calipers. Yes, so red brake calipers don't come by default with the car. It's just, I guess, Audi nickel and diming. But the reverse staggered setup is actually interesting in that you actually have 255 cross-section tires up front and 235 over here in the back, which is interesting because when people typically say staggered tire setup, it's the other way around where you have the fatter tires up back. But it makes sense given that this is a primarily front wheel driven car and a bunch of the power actually goes to the front wheels to have more traction up front to sort of counter the understeery nature of such a setup. And it works actually pretty well. I'll get to the driving bit a little later, but then this car is, and I'm not exaggerating, very neutral. This is not going to make Chris Harris happy. Obviously, this is not a tail-happy car. It never will be. It's a four-wheel drive, quattro-powered car. Well, Haldex at least. But it's for a four-wheel drive front-bias car primarily. It's exceptionally neutral. So out back, again, differences. You see, I don't think there are many differences in the tail light. Maybe these are slightly darker than your typical A3 tail lights, but nothing crazy. Down here is the piece de resistance. This is the incredibly beautiful exhaust. This is the real exhaust, by the way. I don't know if you can see. There you go. You can see the real dual exhaust tips inside and this fat pipe here. This is a fat pipe. I think only the Nissan GTR that at least that I've seen, I'm sure there are other cars too, that has just as fat, if not a fatter exhaust tip. You see the rear diffuser. It's a fairly aggressive diffuser, which is very different from what you see on the lower spec A3 S3 cars. And obviously, again, you'll see the badging. Oh, and you see this, I want to call it subtle, but maybe it's not subtle, but it's more subtle than some of the other stuff, that especially what you see on the GLA 45, that ugly piece of wing. This is actually something that is a lot more subtle. You can, if I'm not mistaken, get this from Audi in carbon fiber, but I think it's an extra option. It's not part of a package. You need to buy it separately, but the dealer should fit it for you. But yeah, I think that's what the exterior differences are of the RS3 versus the A3. Oh, actually, one little ugly piece. Do you see this over here? So let me see if I can show you it from a side. That little black plastic lip. I personally am not 100% sure what it is. It looks incredibly tacky. But then reading online and looking at some of the posts, I think what it has to do with is the fact that the lip of the tire juts out from the car by a certain amount. And I think in certain European countries, it's not supposed to. The body of the car needs to be in line or in front or over the wheels. And I think Audi just cheaped out and decided to put a little plastic flap here. That actually brings up another point. The bodywork on this is, and unlike a lot of the other RS model cars, does not have a particularly flared out wheel arch, front or back. Audi has changed the track on the front, so this car does in fact have a wider stance, which technically makes it a wider car, but they haven't really put the typical boxed out, flared out wheel arches, which again, as I said, I'm okay with it personally, but then the end result is that they had to do something incredibly cheap and tacky like this to get by certain regulations. So yeah, this is the exterior of the Audi RS3 2018, the sedan. Let's go look at some of the other fun stuff in a bit. Okay, so here is the part that truly sets this car apart from, well, everything else in the Audi range for sure, but also a good chunk of the cars out there today, the powertrain. So this is a bespoke 5-cylinder 2.5 liter inline 5 engine, single turbocharged with twin scroll turbos. This is what makes this car. I'll get to that a little later, but this car has, you know, its fair share of quirks and whatnot, and even the pricing kind of puts it right up there for a lot of people. But this, the engine and the drivetrain and powertrain in general is actually what makes this car, right? So you're buying this car primarily because you want this. This is what is driving your purchase. If that is not the case, you're buying it for the looks or you know, because it's the most expensive A3 on the showroom floor, you may actually come away a bit disappointed. So keep that in mind, right? So again, it's transversely mounted, not longitudinal, because this is based on the MQB platform, the Volkswagen MQB platform. So I think it's only the, actually I know it's only the A4 and above that gets the longitudinal engine mounts. So this, the A3, S3, RS3, the TT, TTS and TTRS all have their engine, whether it's 4-cylinder or 5-cylinder. I don't know if they still have the VR6, but if they do, they are all mounted transversely. This is mated to a 7-speed dual clutch. If I'm not mistaken, it's their DQ500 dual clutch. So it can actually take a good bit of the horsepower and torque that this particular engine puts out. So yeah, so this engine is rated at 400 horsepower and 354 pound-foot of torque, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is mated to the DQ500 7-speed dual clutch from Audi. when you factor in the fact that this is a 3,500 something pound car, this particular combination paired with the aggressive Haldex setup, which we'll talk about in a little bit, makes it remarkably responsive. There are some quirks to it, especially when you consider or compare this to twin turbo cars or supercharged cars, but this is a brute of an engine. It absolutely is. It sounds incredible. It's very responsive. It's brutal. It's awesome. A couple of other interesting things about this particular powertrain. It's actually not a very high maintenance. Well, that's a little early to say that, but let me put it this way. Unlike a lot of the other M engines or the AMG engines, this actually requires or runs off of regular 5W30 motor oil. It just needs to meet the BW 504 or 502 spec that you see over here. But then again, as I mentioned, unlike some of the M engines, this does not need bespoke engine oil, which actually came as a surprise to me, because I was preparing myself to try and hoard a bunch of Mobil 1 something very specific oil that is tailor-made for this engine, but that doesn't seem to be the case, which is very surprising, because that means that since I do change the oil in my cars every 6 months or 5,000 miles, I can just continue using the Mobil 1 Euro Formula 0W40 that I use on the S4 and the all-road. So general upkeep should be on par with the other cars that I have. Now, that being said, there is a bit of a pain in the fact that the oil filter housing is unfortunately not accessible from the top of the car. You need to actually get underneath the car, which is a pain. It definitely is the pain, because both on the S4, the all-road, and in fact even the TDI Jetta wagon that we had, the oil filter housing was right up there. So oil changes were a breeze. It never took more than 30 minutes or so. So I still will be using the oil extractor to get the oil out, but obviously to swap the oil filter, I need to get down there, which, I mean, it is what it is, I guess. Not much can be done about that. Alright, on to the interior now. So in terms of let's start with the door panel. So I went with the optional carbon fiber trim here. I think it goes some ways in sprucing up the somewhat ordinary interior. The car comes standard with this Alcantara suede finish inserts. There is, I think this is leatherette. This is not real leather. Leatherette on the armrests all the way here. Nice soft touch plastic up top. I really like this hollowed out door handle. The impression I think they want to give is of weight savings. I'm sure it saves next to nothing, but nevertheless, the attention to detail is certainly appreciated. Again, soft touch plastics for the most part, except of course over here at the very bottom, near the door pocket, where you see hard plastics, which I think is par for the course for this segment of car. Actually, that brings up a good point. I forgot to mention that earlier. Folks buying this car need to understand that the base price of the A3 is $30-something thousand. Now, obviously, for a lot of people, that is quote-unquote expensive, but this is still essentially a $30-something thousand car that has been spruced up both mechanically as well as cosmetically to reach a price tag of about $60-something for this particular car here. So that is an important thing to keep in mind, right? This is not a luxury car from the get-go. This is a spruced up version of an entry-level compact luxury at best, right? And you're going to see that show through in a lot of, I'll go through some of the other quirks, but you'll see that show through in a lot of this car. So as I mentioned earlier, while looking at the engine and talking about the powertrain, you are buying this car for the powertrain. Please keep that in mind. Right. Okay. So going back to the door panel, I have the optional Bang & Olufsen sound system. Actually, you can't buy it or option it separately on the RS3. Unfortunately, unlike the other Audis, you have to get the technology package, which I think is I don't know, not really needed for this car, but it comes bundled only as part of that package. And you'll see something interesting here. You'll see this really cheap piece of crap garage door opener. Yes, that is correct. This car actually does not come with a garage door opener or the home link built in. This again, as I mentioned, are some of the basic roots of this car. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, the S3 or the 2016 model S3 onwards, Audi did decide to put in the home link capability, but the A3 doesn't come with it, and the RS3 doesn't either. Moving on to the seats. So again, leather seats. This red stitching, by the way, is optional. This is part of the dynamic package, if I'm not mistaken. Although I'm not sure of that. You can get it either in red or rock grey. I feel like, again, given how quote-unquote ordinary the interior of this car is, especially when you compare it to the S3 and A3, the red stitching and the suede and the carbon fiber go some ways in at least somewhat distinguishing this from the sort of lesser A3, S3 cars. Again, and you also see the quilting. This, I think, it looks really good. It looks really nice. But at this point, you can get a Kia with quilted leather seats. So I think this particular design theme has been played out. But it looks good. It is what it is. Ooh, and you also get the seat belts with the red stripes, which again is a nice little touch. Nothing functional, but then it just shows that Audi has paid some attention to detail. Sticking to the seats, so quirks, right? As I mentioned, this car has many. So you have extendable thigh support, which is always appreciated for especially taller drivers. You have power lumbar support, right, for your back over here, which is great. I mean, it really helps a lot. However, recline and reach, and let me see if I can get there you go, recline, reach, as well as fore aft movement are all manual. Now, this came as a surprise to me because, again, this is a $60-something thousand car, and even the S3, the cheaper S3, comes with power seats. So I don't quite understand the logic behind having a partial power, mostly manual setup for the RS3. When I spoke to the, again, ignored the dirty mats, this in fact goes to show that this is a daily driver. But yeah, going back to the seat. So talking to the dealer, they mentioned that one reason, and he didn't have an answer, a definitive answer, but the one reason that he mentioned was for weight savings. I'm not sure I'm entirely convinced that makes sense, frankly, at least technically, but then I can see why Audi would do something like this if they're subscribing to the Porsche school of design, which is the less is more, or giving people the impression that if I strip out the air conditioning and if I remove the nav system and put straps here instead of actual door handles, people get the impression that, ooh, this is aggressive weight savings, and it makes it more of a performance car. Maybe that's the thought, or that's the path that Audi was trying to go down, but this sucks. And because of the fact that the seats aren't powered, you do not get memory either. So if you're planning on sharing this car with your spouse or significant other or someone else, make note of that. It's going to be a real pain. You also get the illuminated sill plates over here, and you get the metal finish, accelerator, brake, and the dead pedals. So nice little touches over there. Alright, moving along, again, sticking with the interior. So the red finish that you see across the AC vents is part of the same package that gets you the red stitching everywhere. As I mentioned, it just does a little bit more to sort of spruce up the otherwise very well built, exceptionally well built, but very ordinary interior. You get the same sort of suede Alcantara finish on the gear lever too. Again, appreciated, although I'm not a huge fan of the Alcantara. That's actually why I use gloves while driving this car. I think Alcantara ends up looks dirty very quickly. You have the MMI screen, which thankfully in this car actually pops up and down. So if I press the power button over here, you'll see that guy pop down. If I press the power button again, you'll see that the thing pops back up. This is great. And this is great primarily because this car, as with a lot of the Audis, comes with the virtual cockpit as part of the technology package. And I feel like the virtual cockpit is great, but it makes the center screen mostly redundant. And the fact that on our all-road, majority of the times, these two screens are essentially showing the exact same thing, it just annoys me. And you can just turn the screen off in the A4, S4, all-road, A6, etc., etc. You can't pop the thing down. So since this is based on the older Audi infotainment platform, this thing still pops up and down, which I certainly appreciate. Now, if you look at the steering wheel, you get the typical flat bottom steering wheel that is reminiscent of quote-unquote performance cars. You do get the nice grippy suede, but again, as I said, this gets dirty fairly quickly. That's why I drive with the gloves on. If you look at the controls on screen, fairly typical and standard for Audi. It lets you repeat the last navigation step or instruction. You can map this little button to a bunch of different functions. It's like a custom button. Phone related functions, voice activation, volume up, volume down. You can even fast forward, rewind. Over on the other side, you have the buttons to essentially help you navigate the virtual cockpit. It looks a little complicated. It really isn't actually. It works exceptionally well. It's very, very straightforward. And then you have the cruise control stalk over there. You have the wiper stalk over there, and you have the gear shift up, gear shift down paddles on the back of the steering wheel. So fairly standard setup. As is typical of most German cars, you have the light control. Again, as I mentioned, even though this car doesn't have a separate fog lamp, what you see there on the top left, there you go. That is the quote-unquote fog lamp as part of the cornering light setup. And it actually works really, really well. So yeah, I mean, it cleans up the front end without really compromising the functionality, which is wonderful, which is great. I like that. In terms of the actual buttons on the center console, fairly sparse actually. Let's go through each one of them. You have the drive select button, which lets you change the different drive modes. Let me show you what happens when that is pressed. So as you can see, when you press that, you can switch between comfort mode, auto mode, dynamic, and individual. Comfort is obviously the most quote-unquote comfortable. Auto is not really auto, I think. It's just the name that they've given for that is something in between the medium mode or normal mode. You obviously have dynamic, which turns everything up to 11, and individual essentially lets you go in and play around with each one of the parameters individually, and hence the name individual. We'll get to this a little later, but it works really, really well for the most part. Again, as I said, I've tried the Benz command system. I've tried the BMW iDrive system and obviously the Audi MMI. The new iDrives are really, really good, but I still feel that Audi's MMI setup is a little better than most of the competition. Now, speaking of the MMI on the RS3, S3 and A3, it may look the same, but it's not the exact same as that's what's available in the current gen A4, A5, S4, S5, or the upcoming A7 and the A8. This is sort of a hack job in the sense that in order to support the virtual cockpit feature and the LTE Wi-Fi hotspot feature, etc., they've quote-unquote hacked on some of these capabilities, but the underlying hardware is still what's been available in the A3, S3 for some time, and that shows itself up in not just the quality of the graphics and the frame rate, which is not bad by the way. it's just not as smooth as what I see on our all road. But in addition to that, even when you end up using the Audi Mmi Connect feature, which lets you using your phone connect to the car and play around with a bunch of the settings, you realize that you actually are locked out from a lot of the features that are available for the A4 and A5 owners, in that you can't remotely lock and unlock the car, check to see if what you're seeing over there, that's if any windows or doors are open. If you have the A4, A5 and above cars, you can actually see all of that through your phone itself. You can't do that on the RS3, the S3, because the version of the hardware that they use is not the same as, even though it looks the same, it's not the same as what's used in the A4 and above. So that is something to keep in mind also. So yeah, you have the drive select button, you have the park assist on off button that just turns off the ultrasonic sensors and the camera. This just has a rear facing camera, the hazard lights, the traction control and stability control on off lights, and that lets you essentially turn off the display, just the screen. Yeah, that's the passenger airbag system warning light. This is the climate control. You turn that on by hitting the little button up front over there. Again, very logical, fairly well laid out. You have dual zone climate control on this. Once again, as I mentioned, even though this is a $60-something thousand car, it quote unquote has just dual zones. So now it may come across as I'm complaining about this. I actually am not. I'm just letting a lot of people who are planning on buying this car or looking at this car, let them know that, hey, these are some of the things that cheaper cars with an Audi's own range, like the S4, for example, does come with 3-zone climate control. So that is something to keep in mind. Seat heater, again, this does not come with ventilated seats. It's heater only. The S4, S5 have, I think, the option of both heated, ventilated, as well as massaging seats, something to keep in mind. Your typical HVAC controls, nothing crazy over here. And again, as is typical of Audi, very, very good quality fit and finish inside. Even the cigarette lighter, right? When you look at it, it's the knurling. It's not needed. This is probably something a lot of people won't even end up using, but it's nice. It's nice that they pay that much attention to detail. It's something that I genuinely appreciate, and what I feel sets Audi apart from a lot of the competition. You have one USB port over there. You have a nice white backlit display. It looks better than a lot of the orange, red, blue that you see in some of the competition. I think this looks classier. Then you have average size cup holders, nothing to honestly write home about. It serves the purpose. You have a little storage area there, which is where I usually keep the key. And then you have the gear lever with the RS logo up top, and the button over here to essentially move the gear lever. And of course, at the very bottom, you have the Mmi Control Stack. You have a touch sensitive dial over here. You can actually use this to write out alphabets and letters and numbers. Again, the click is very, very satisfying. Good job here. Fairly typical controls for the nav, telephone, radio, media, etc., etc. Again, very, very obvious. Nothing crazy in terms of the UI and UX elements. It works really, really well. I'm not a big fan of this plasticky metal looky thingy. It grabs a lot of dust in between them, as you can see over there. I'm not sure if it's visible. My A4 all-road also has this. I don't like it, but it is what it is. Oh yeah, and you do get these sort of suede pads, so to speak, to rest your legs on, or your knees on while driving. I think it really helps a lot, especially given that it's a somewhat small car on the inside. I think that's really it. Oh, okay, good thing that the key came in frame. So again, speaking of its very sort of humble, not economy, but basic car roots, this is the key that comes by default with the RS3. Now, one of the first cars that I actually owned was a 2009, if I'm not mistaken, a Volkswagen Jetta S. So base stripper car that came with a very similar, in fact, near identical switchblade key. And that car, brand new, I think was about $17,000 or $18,000. Why a $65,000 car comes with the same sort of a key as a $18,000 car is beyond me. Apart from this RS badging that you see over here, there you go, the RS badging. Nothing sets this apart from the significantly cheaper Volkswagens. Again, this is not me complaining per se. I'm just making everyone aware, because I feel like small things like where Audi spent like a crap ton of attention when it comes to the knurling on the dials and everything. Why they let this one by, I genuinely don't know. It's beyond me, but they have done it. But now, that being said, I think Audi recognizes that this is an issue for some folks who are, looking to buy a 60-something thousand dollar car, and therefore might not be disappointed, but something that they would like to remedy. And that's why they sell you these. Now, this is not a new key fob. Now, this is actually a cover for the key fob, rendered in the same sort of leather that they do a lot of their seats. Hold on, my cameras. Yeah, there you go. Right, it's the same sort of finish even. It actually feels really nice. It goes a long way in, I feel like, alleviating the issues that I have with the standard key. I know it's a small thing. Again, I get that. So, let's move beyond that. It's just that it makes the thing feel a little bit more premium, which I feel is something it should, for a car that costs so much. So if you guys are interested, I can actually put in the part number. This is actually available in a variety of different finishes, colors, textures, etc. I bought this particular crimson red to at least try and match the red vents that you see in the car and the stitching. So yeah, I think that's really it with the interior. Oh, we almost forgot the rear. So before we go on to the rear, I just want to again call out the fact that owing to its basic car roots, at least within the Audi range, even though it looks like there is a sensor for the keyless entry and locking in the rear, there actually isn't, right? So you see that up front over here, you have the keyless entry sensor, where if I have the key in my hand or in my pocket, you could hear the door lock and unlock, right? Now it's crapping out on me, but there you go, right? That doesn't happen up back here, and that's because, again, part of the cost-cutting measures, and I actually don't know what it is really. Again, they shouldn't be doing this on a car that costs so much and is positioned so high up its range, but the rear does not have these sensors. As a result, if you leave something in the back of the car and you've locked the car already, you need to either manually use the key fob to unlock the car, or you need to unlock the front doors and then open the rear doors, which is really annoying, but yeah, it is what it is. So going to the back, so again, very similar treatment on the door with the carbon fiber inserts, the suede insert over here, the Bang & Olufsen speakers, a red stitching on the leatherette, and hard plastic at the bottom to complement the soft on top. But in terms of the rear, again, similar sort of stitching. The diamond quill stitching that you see in the front is also visible over here. Nice, soft, supple, smooth grain leather, which is very different from the stock leather that you see in the A3, S3 and the BMWs. I don't like the hard grain that you see on a lot of those cars. On the back, you see the little sculpting here to get you incremental more legroom. A little net here for the cargo, which obviously is not particularly useful if you're already short of legroom. What you also see in the back over here is the vents. Again, this is not a 3-zone system. This just blows air based on whatever has been set up front, cold or warm. What you can change though is the intensity of the airflow. I also, as part of the same package that gets you the stitching, the red stitching, you get the rear USB ports, and as it says here, it's charge only. You cannot use it to stream music over USB or Android Auto or any of that, strictly for charge only. I think that's it with the for this time. For sure, that's it with the interior. I can't think of anything else. If I didn't cover anything, let me know and I'll try and cover it. Alright, so now that I've talked to you guys about the interior, the exterior, the specs of the car, and you know, a couple of the quirks and whatnot, as I mentioned, you buy this car for the powertrain, you buy this car for the way it drives, you buy this car for the experience it provides, the sensory experience, the drive, the audio, the feedback, everything, right? So let's take it for a quick spin and show you and talk to you about what separates this car from a lot of the other cars, both in its segment as well as price categories above and below it, what sets this apart, right? So let's get started. Alright, let's get on to the drive now. So again, as I mentioned, it's the engine and the powertrain in this car that truly sets it apart from a bunch of other competing products in this segment, and in fact is the one reason why you should buy this car, despite some of the other quirks that it has and the price tag and all that other good stuff, right? So to recap, at the heart of this car is a 2.5 liter 5-cylinder single turbocharged engine, developing right around 400 odd horsepower. It's a beautiful engine. It's I mean I don't know how to describe it. It's wonderful. It sounds absolutely incredible. Audi's done a bang on job with the exhaust on this car, but much more importantly, this may sound cliched, and it probably is, but then bear with me. You probably would have heard of a lot of car reviewers when talking about a bunch of cars say how they have a Jekyll and Hyde character, right? This is actually more true for this car than any other car that I've known. But let me elaborate a little bit. So for one, as I mentioned, you have the drive select mode. I've actually mapped this key here to the drive select mode so that I don't have to actually go in and press the button here. So when this car is in comfort mode, right, for example, it's set to comfort mode right now, this is a wonderful daily driver. It's actually really comfortable. I mean, the suspension doesn't crash. It's obviously not floaty or buttery smooth, but it's very well composed. It absorbs most bumps really well. It doesn't let much harshness in through the cabin. It's wonderful. The gearing works well. The steering has reasonable feedback. Again, this is an electronic unit, so don't expect it to be like a hydraulic power steering system, but reasonable feedback. All in all, comfort mode is great for everyday driving. You really can't have any complaints with it. It just works beautifully. When you switch over to some of the more aggressive modes, actually auto is good if you want to have most of the comfort mode, but not have the transmission be as lazy, so to speak, right? So right now I'm on auto mode again. Until about 4,000 RPM, this car essentially behaves like an S3. Now that's not a negative, that's actually a very good feature, because you don't want your everyday driver to jump around, howl, scream, crash, thud. You want it to be a reasonable experience that's you know, it doesn't distract from a daily commute. It just gets you from point A to point B without too much fuss, without being too brash, without being too loud, and this car can do that actually. And again, as I said, until about 4,000 RPM, that's exactly how this car behaves. It's very good to like drive around, just putter around, and absolutely no issues whatsoever. However, and that's the Jekyll part of it. However, if you either switch the car to dynamic mode, which I just did right now, or you happen to cross the 4,000 RPM range, 3,500, 4,000 RPM range, this car transforms. Let me show you. It's unlike any other vehicle that I've actually driven in this price range. It's astounding. The sheer, the ferociousness of the acceleration, the sound the car makes, the way it behaves is the exact opposite of the way the car behaves less than about 3500 RPM, right? And I love that about this car. So when I want to be naughty, when I want to be that guy in the commute, and when I have some free space in front of me, this car goes batshit, right? At the same time, like right now I'm cruising around at 70 something miles per hour. You switch it to individual or auto or whatever it is, it kicks down to 7th gear. It's just cruising along. The audio feedback within the cabin reduces drastically. It's an awesome car. It's a wonderful car, right? And again, as I said, you buy this car for the powertrain. That's basically what you do. And because of that, a lot of the other quirks and flaws, you can't help but just, let me take a turn here. You can't help but just look past them, because mind you, none of them are major flaws. Again, as I said, there's nothing that kills this car in terms of the interior, the exterior, or anything. Some people may not find the exterior design as aggressive. That's a personal choice. As I mentioned, I personally feel that for a car that costs this much, the interior could really make do with a little bit more in terms of both cosmetics as well as actual features. But again, as I said, this is where Audi has poured in all the money, right? In the transmission, in the engine. It's just freaking amazing. And speaking of the transmission, I have to mention one thing though. As I said, it's a great daily driver overall, except in a handful of cases where mostly when you're trying to commute at sub 10-15 miles per hour, which is par for the course here in the Bay Area, and you're trying to accelerate, not necessarily very fast, but trying to accelerate, the DSG, the dual clutch transmission, can in fact be caught off guard. So there are times where in the low speed daily commute, again as I said 10, 15, 20 miles per hour, where the transmission can feel a little jerky. So I guess that's what happens, or that's what comes as a part of a package with the dual clutch transmissions. My all-road does the same thing, although to a smaller extent. It's not as pronounced, but that really is the only sort of downside of this. And again, the flip side, what you gain for all the jerkiness in the low speed traffic and commute is absolutely sharp, super quick upshifts and downshifts, and the transmission does not in fact it holds gear up to the red line if you wanted to. I can't demo that to you guys today because again the car has 411 miles on it. It's not broken in yet, and this is my personal car, so it's not a press car that I can just flog around. But the point being, yes, super crisp transmission shifts. It works really, really well, and overall I feel like Audi's done an exceptionally good job with the powertrain on this car. And again, to reiterate maybe for the umpteenth time, you buy this car for the powertrain. Now, a couple of things that I want to call out. As I mentioned, as part of the quirks of this car, right? There's no power seat movement in this car. Only the lumbar movement is power. Everything else is a manual. No memory seats. No home link for the garage door opener. It doesn't, in fact, even have insulation under the front hood, which I found very, very surprising. So it doesn't have a bunch of small little things here and there. Now, some of that is essentially just cost cutting, because again, as I said, at the end of the day, this is based off of a cheaper platform, the A3 S3, which is the bottommost rung in at least Audi's product stack. But then a lot of it, I want to say, has actually paid off in terms of weight savings, right? That is something kudos to Audi for pulling something like this off. The reason being, this car weighs in at approximately about 3,590 something pounds, right? And this is actually, by the way, all from Audi and the other manufacturers' respective websites. So you can go look it up their respective websites and see if I'm off. So 3,500 and something pounds. That actually is right up there with the CLA 45 AMG, which would be a very, very close competitor to this car. It's the souped up version of Mercedes-Benz's CLA 250. Again, it has the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system. It does have a 4-cylinder engine, but nevertheless, it's a souped-up version of that basic car. I don't personally like that car a whole lot, especially the interior. The engine is beautiful, but the interior, I never really. I've just not been a huge fan of the CLA, GLA series. The GLA is ridiculous with the wing and whatnot. It just looks utterly, totally like a boy racer, the exact opposite of this car. Nevertheless, so the RS3 and the GLA 45, CLA 45 AMG are about in the same weight range, right? However, the weight distribution on the CLA 45 is something along the lines of 60% front and 40% back, which is not very good at all actually. In fact, it's reminiscent of a lot of the older Audis. If you look at this RS3, Audi has not published official numbers. When I looked up online across a couple of different reviews, the numbers being quoted are along the lines of 56% front and 44% rear, some variation of that, right? This is actually pretty impressive, and especially given the total weight. And the reason I say this is because, for reference, the BMW M2 is about 3,500 pounds. Now, let's go through that for a second. The BMW M2 obviously is not available with 4-wheel drive, it's a strict rear-wheel drive car only, and that 3,500 something pounds, by the way, is the weight for the automatic transmission version, which is the correct compare, because the RS3 and the CLA 45 only come with automatic transmissions. So despite the fact that both the CLA 45 and the Audi RS3 have 4-wheel drive setup, 4MATIC and the Haldex based Quattro, and the fact that both those cars actually have rear doors and more room and whatnot, they're actually within the same ballpark range in terms of weight of the BMW M2. That's pretty incredible. I did not know that actually. That came as a bit of a surprise to me. And what is even more surprising, and this I genuinely I had to verify this across a couple of different sources, is when you look at the one step down for the M2, which is the BMW M240i, is the weight distribution. Now, this came as a big surprise to me, believe it or not. For the automatic transmission version with the X-Drive drivetrain of the M240i, the weight distribution is along the lines of 54% over the front and 46 something percent over the back. That's very surprising, because yes, it's still a little bit better than the RS3, which, as I mentioned, is I think 56, 57 over the front and the rest over the back. But this is not anywhere near the 50-50 perfect weight distribution that a lot of the other BMWs are, at least the 3 Series are, or for that matter even the M2. That's surprising, right? And that goes to show that while a lot of these quirks and whatnot that I complained about the RS3 might be annoying on a day-to-day basis, it has paid off dividends when it comes to weight distribution and weight savings in general, right? And that shows in the driving. When you're driving this car, I'm not going to even try to attempt to sell this as a Chris Harris style oversteer happy vehicle. It's not. It never will be. However, it is very, very neutral. Even when pushed, unless pushed to the absolute ragged edge where you don't want a car to snap oversteer, this car handles really, really well. It still has the Haldex setup, but then the folks over at Audi Sport, formerly Quattro GmbH, have played around with the controller, and I think they claim that it can send 100% of the power to the rear. I really don't know how that works, given the fact that Haldex is not capable of doing that. But I think what they're trying to say is that 100% of the available power, which means that if for whatever reason the traction control management decides that it has to cut engine power from 100%, that number that's less than 100%, all of that reduced power can in fact be sent to the back. Which is different from some of the other S-line cars, where I think it's capped off at 70 something or 80 something percent to the rear at max. I think my S4 goes up to 80% rear at max. So
it makes a difference, right? All of that, the staggered tire setup, the weight savings, the better weight distribution, everything makes a big difference in the way this car handles. And so that is something that potential buyers should keep in mind. Don't go by what most other reviews out there say about rear wheel car drives are where it's all fun and all that stuff. That's not necessarily true. Yes, if you're tracking the car, it's probably a much bigger deal, but in day-to-day driving, enthusiast driving, if you're driving down twisty, windy roads, this car is probably just as good as the stuff that comes out of BMW and Benz and whatnot, the rear wheel drive competitors. It works really, really well.